Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, and if you haven't seen it in the past, you're probably or if you have seen it in the past, you're anticipating it. Namaste and in Lak'ech come from two ancient languages. Namaste comes from the Sanskrit spoken. It's Brahmi, and it means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. In Lak'ech comes from the Mayan civilization, and it means something similar, but it's more personal, and that is, I am another you. So imagine holding those two thoughts and emotions inside of you, the awareness that it creates as you walk through your life on a daily basis, meeting others and doing all the fun stuff and even the not so fun stuff. Imagine the difference that kind of attitude can have in your life. Don't believe me? Test it for yourself. See what happens. Okay, so this week's guest is Brian Kelly. He is the President and Human Connection Officer for Brian Kelly Leadership Coaching. He is also a member of the Biz Catalyst 360 group, which is how we met. He is a talented author for deep thinkers. And he also was a graduate from Boston College and Georgetown University, and both business administration, finance, and economics from Boston College, and leadership coaching from Georgetown University. Brian, glad to have you here. Thanks for coming aboard.
Thanks so much, Jen. I appreciate being here and look forward to our conversation.
Well, cool. As always, my inquiry, and part of it's for my own corroboration and validation, I guess, is that, we all go through periods of our lives, and some of younger, some midlife, some older, in awakening to some kind of inner connection with life. So I'm just based on what I've written, your writing and our initial conversations, I know you've had something like that. Could you kind of elucidate on what that was like and maybe the period of life that it happened?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, there's probably been a couple, but the main one that I'll focus on is when I was at Georgetown and going through that first coaching certification program. I went in with a mindset of, this is where I was at the time, of being in control. And I talked to several of my peers at the place of employment that I was at to get a sense for what to expect. And they're like, oh, you're going to have to do triads. You're going to have to bring stuff to get coached on and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. I'll do that. But I'm going to control how vulnerable I get with
Yeah, right.
So you go through the program and I'm opening up. And, honestly, I was struggling in terms of applying the learning and I had this conversation with myself, and more than a conversation, it was actually a deep conversation and reflection on what I really wanted to do in terms of becoming a coach and serving in that way. I was like, what's getting in my way? Because I was having challenges with applying it, and I knew I could do it. Something was getting in the way, and I was like, what's going on here? So May of about 2013, this is about maybe 3/4 of the way to 80% through the program. For about a week, I just went totally inside and just reflected on, like, what's going on, what's getting in the way. Do I really want to be, going in this direction? Is it just something that I'm doing to check the box, or is it something that's meaningful for me? The outcome of that was a shift in my relationship with vulnerability. And so my belief had been that vulnerability meant weakness. I'd been conditioned in terms of the different phases through life and through different experiences that men weren't supposed to show emotion, men weren't supposed to be vulnerable, right? And so
it turns out to be a superpower, isn't it?
It turns out to be a superpower. How about that, right? And so I come to that realization. I realize I'm going to have to invite my clients to step into vulnerability, to become better leaders, and to better connect with themselves. And so my reframe was that vulnerability is human. It's how we connect with one another, right? And so that was a game changer for me. And
sure.
a story I tell all the time is that was May and the last set of classes was in June. So I go and show up for the first day of the last set of classes. And I go up to the second floor of the building where the room is. And between the elevator and the room, I passed two classmates and they said exactly the same thing to me. They said, "You look lighter." And they weren't talking about my weight. My whole physical manifestation had changed and they could see something in it. And while I didn't need the validation because I'd been through my process and I knew I had changed, that validation of congruence was important because I had been experiencing incongruence in terms of the workplace, in terms of how I felt versus what the environment was and those kind of things.
Isn't it
And so
interesting how others, just to interrupt, because I think this is a really cool point to make notice of. And that's when you've made those adjustments internally, your outer world reflects it. And sometimes in obvious ways, like your classmates did.
it's so important. And it's a lot of the work that I do with the people that I work with is, we talk about, what kind of coach are you? They want to label a coach a certain thing: leadership coach, an executive coach, a life coach. And that's fine, right? You got to have some clarity about what you're, who you're seeking and what the services they provide. I've never really thought about myself that way because ultimately any kind of coaching you do is going to come back to that inside out story of how you show up differently. And that's what I help people do, is I help people see differently. And it's mindset coaching, if you will.
Well, in order to do that, though, as any kind of coach worth your salt, you have to do that first.
You've got to have been through something, right?
Right.
And learn something from that, and be able to then bring that to how you serve. And that's the gift that came from that process, because it was pretty tough week going through that. I kind of shut myself down and isolated myself, went inside, which for someone of where I was at the time, that was a big deal, because I didn't really go into that thinking about those kind of things. And so now a lot of what I do, ultimately, the core of it, we can, whatever the goals are the goals, but the core issue remains what is your relationship with yourself? And how do you shift that based on what is getting in the way, whether it's vulnerability or control or some version of fear?
Now, speaking of that conversation with self, okay, so there's the two, right? You're bantering back and forth as you're conferring and analyzing and conjecturing and postulating, all that kind of stuff. Did you ever notice a third voice that comes in with clarity?
There's the, well, I guess the way I would look at it is there's the voice of doubt and voice of, what are you trying to do here? What are you, kind of skeptical. And then there's the possibilities voice. And the challenge, what I realized was that because I'm a possibilities thinker, and what I realized was the best of me I'd squelched for most of my life because I was listening to the wrong voice. To your point, it's my voice, my inner voice had been muted. And so what ends up being a lot of my work too is helping people see that they're not stepping fully into their voice and trying to discover what that is, and then step into the courage of sharing it and believing that their perspective matters. And it often shows up in giving away power in terms of a lot of the people I work with, what that looks like. And people get confused about, well, I don't give away my power. And then, we go through situations and I just point back, remember when I was talking about that? This is what I was talking about.
Well, you give it away to gain it, right?
Yeah.
There was even a guy that, a long time ago said, you give up your life for my sake and you'll gain it. Well, it's the same thing when you release to that. Now, and for me, I developed my inner voice very early in life, and then had to navigate through life and see that, many others haven't. And so there was this question of, is my reality correct? And of course, it got proven over time. Yeah, and you learn more, better questions, deeper exploration and inquiry. And yet, there's this ultimate release and then gaining of a better connection to yourself and to those around you. And your whole life shifts from that place of, like you were talking earlier, kind of a little bit of angst, right? To this place of, oh, okay, it's all about flow. and being vulnerable and asking the questions and then allowing those answers to come forth. You mentioned one thing, one of the articles I read on Biz Catalyst that recently that you wrote was about unlearning.
Mhm.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What was the process? How did you unpack that?
So it's been a journey, but that one of the books that I've been a contributing author to, that was the title of my chapter, and the book is Becoming You: Stories of Courage and Vulnerability. And so I shared my story in terms of the vulnerability story, but then sort of an evolution to that from childhood and what experiences were there. And so things, we were taught to be nice, right? What does that mean, right? Be nice because based on what your lens of that means. Yeah, but the thing is, it was different for everybody. It's like, nice boys do this, nice girl, that kind of stuff. And there's no judgment really, because people are actually influencing you from the lens through which they look, right?
Sure.
So there's no judgment there. But the reality is, when we're young, we just assimilate, we take, and that's what we learn from our influencers. And so we mature, we get into adulthood, and we're still living with those beliefs and values. And so the journey of learning for me was most powerful when I realized that the best thing I could do for myself was to unlearn, to check some of the things that, to your point about, am I on the right path? Is this, is my view of the world the way it should be? Or is to check some of the things and see, do they really, are they aligned with what I believe? Are they still, things I want to carry on my journey with me or not? And then the realization that I can leave behind what I didn't want to, and I could form my own beliefs and values and choices. And so I make the distinction in one of my articles of being nice versus being kind. And what I believe they meant when they were inviting me to be nice was be kind, like as if I wouldn't, but that was the invitation. And to me, nice is doesn't have any meaning to it. It's just, it's amorphous in its meaning.
Right. Well, and now there's the infamous nice.
Yep.
Kind of, and that's in a lot of ways it's embracing the cool stuff, right? And nice doesn't necessarily, and even kindness, you can be kind and still be revealing to others, and kind of opening up sincere questions that don't necessarily, and this is one thing that seems to be consistent, is that questions are often seen as confrontations, especially when they're getting you to question your beliefs.
And that's back to how you choose to see and how you choose to receive, or where you are maybe from a mindset perspective in terms of willingness to see. And then also maybe how the tone and how the presentation of the question can have an effect on that too.
Oh, absolutely. From the exterior. From the interior, there's like, what? Right.
Yeah.
You start
my
looking
God.
inwards, like, okay, where am I really with that? And is it a belief? Is it based, is it a belief that I've accepted from others? Or is it something that my experience has offered? Or is it something that is just contrived for some reason, just because we're able to do so, right? And then I always like it, do we shift from a belief system to an experience system over time because we've tested those beliefs enough?
I believe we do. There's an element of that.
So.
There's an element of that, right? And I call it reflective experience. And the feedback article I did is reflective experiential, right? It's based on what you've experienced, and reflective, having given it some thought and not just automatically consuming it and regurgitating back out.
Right.
And so
perspectives still change over time, or have the opportunity to, because you're continuing to question.
It's an evolution.
It's like throwing your truth on the chopping block and whacking away at it, and eventually it comes down to a form, and then there's that honing process afterwards.
Yeah. It's for me, as I go back to the Georgetown story and that pivot point or that inflection point, it was shifting the relationship and moving from judgment to acceptance. And then you talk about relationship with self and others. It has to start with self, though, right? In terms of how you your mindset around it and how you show up in terms of the language you use, the energy. It's all kind of related. And then when I changed and shifted my relationship with judgment to acceptance, and that happened as part of my process, I found that it wasn't like, oh, I went from 0 to 100 like right then. It's an evolution, but I was more aware of when things were happening, and then I could kind of then hone, as you're talking about, going through the process.
Right.
My awareness had shifted, right? My awareness had shifted and enabled me to see differently, and that's
Okay,
sort
so
of
let's unpack that a little bit. Let me ask you this: did you notice that in that shift, and as you developed the coaching expertise a little more, did you notice that you really, and the self-awareness, to pay attention to the words coming out of your mouth? There's this, well, I don't know what I think until it comes out of my mouth, right, kind of thing. And yet in that flow, because you're able to hear the words and be self-reflective, which doesn't always occur, right? There's a certain tipping point in your own self-awareness process where that becomes part of it, but that's also where we adjust, right? How did that work for you?
So it's interesting, right? So it's a yes and. Yes, I paid more attention to the words. I was more intentional with the words I used. What changed for me was paying attention to my body and feelings, and paying attention to how I felt when I received stuff, when things came up, because I was completely detached from the information that was available in my body in terms of somatics. It was
Right.
interesting because we were
And
doing
even
it.
energy
Energy,
too, because
exactly.
you're feeling what you're describing is that there's these sensations in your body. And our body's an instrument. We just haven't learned how to tune it yet, let alone play it well.
Right.
And even according to other indigenous philosophies, the body is the most important aspect of the reception of information in order to process it, starting with the gut. The first brain is what they call it, the heart being the second brain. And then we make the choices with the third brain after everything's been distilled and presented in a more true fashion.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that in the class in the Georgetown program, they invited us to. They did a little bit on neuroscience, and they said, "Well, what gets formed first in the body, the heart or the mind or the brain?" And I didn't really know the answer at that point, just cognitively. I hadn't really thought about it. And it's interesting, right, that the heart gets formed first, so the messages first are going from the heart outward. And how well do we pay attention to those, or are we conditioned to focus on our mind or what we think, and disregard or learn to become disconnected from the messages coming from our energy
the
and our
heart, or
body?
does it go deeper than that? Because even in the what is the chakra system and that kind of alignment, which is proven to be, pretty substantial, the seat of the will in the solar plexus. So there's the ebb and flow of that will process of whether we're projecting, receiving, or just sensing, what's possible to happen.
Right, and it goes much deeper, just from the context of getting people out of their minds and giving them some context around, basic context around, well, the heart forms first, right? And there's really two-way communication, and we get so wrapped around thoughts and what we're thinking.
And the longest journey, right? The 18 inches.
The 18 inches, exactly. And so as we're learning about that, and we got taught that for our own benefit, and the likelihood that our clients would be struggling with that too, being so wrapped up in
We
our
all
mind.
go through very similar process. The process is pretty much the same. We go through it differently because of how we think and feel
Mm-hmm.
during it.
And I think our experience too, and
Right.
traditions and customs and the context of our life, right? Is
Absolutely.
different. So that creates a different experience. And then, yeah. So it's, that was pivotal for me in terms of personally and professionally, changed how I saw myself, changed how I showed up with other people as was represented, with my classmates, when we came back to class in June. And so, that's really what I help folks do now is, what do they want to be? What is their goal? Yeah, but what is getting in the way of that? And how do we shift what is not serving you to both a mindset and a practice of something that does?
Mm-hmm. Now, in your walk, which is kind of interesting, and I've found that the universe provides the path. It's up to us to walk it, and being able to step into that where there's some significant, to use a Massey term, significant emotional events that help to move you along the spectrum towards a more self-aware being. And when, even throughout your life, whether it was younger, teenagers, we often have experiences and things that happen during that period and the early maturation process in our 20s. What was going on with you during that period?
So, I mean, now we can get into deep stuff now in terms of deep personal stuff, but so there's relationship with
If you care
family
to
members.
share, again,
relationship with family
here we
members.
touch on that vulnerability spot, right?
Right. So relationship with family members, right? And them coming from a generation where there's generational or gender expectations and what they knew, and growing up in a different generation and being exposed to expectations that were more fluid or flexible. And really it came down to things that like emotional intelligence that were lacking in some family members that played critical roles, right? So and so what did that mean for that influence on me, and what can I do? I can be aware of what's going on with me and finding and ascertaining what I need, and then disconnecting from the source of it as being bad or anything negative, but it's right, this is where I am. And so some of that was going on in terms of a little bit lost in terms of direction of where I wanted to go, like coming out of college, go to college, get a job. There was that kind of mindset, and it was like, okay, that seems fairly mindless. Didn't really
and yet you were all in that kind of place too. That was one of those processes, especially from more affluent families. It was like, you got to go to college, not knowing what the heck you're going to do, and you're supposed to be able to have, oh yeah, I have a vision for my life, and this is where I'm going to go. Few do that. For the majority of us, like, we start that process, we get a degree and go into a job that we think that we're, prepared for, and we get there, it's like, oh, I really don't like this. Then what?
Exactly. And then we can go back to education too, right? And it's all about congruence for me, really incongruence. Going through education, the whole school system, I did fairly well there. I ended up at Boston College. I was blessed in many ways. But incongruence, like why do I have to take calculus? How am I going to ever use calculus? Like, why do I, like, certain things that are requirements, like why does everybody have to take the same curriculum? Like,
right,
everybody's got different, and so those kind of things, I was like, you got to do it, so just do it. Okay, fine, go through college, get to the work environment, it's the same thing. It's like, this is the way we do things.
right. Well, our educational system, when Dewey and his cronies set it up, was to put people in the workplace and in factories, because that's the way things were at that time, and there really wasn't a look forward as to, okay, what are our future needs going to be, and are these kids and our future generations, that will they need to have the critical thinking and exploratory skill set of knowing how they learn first, and then being able to apply the aptitude that they have toward something that makes their life meaningful and serves the community. So we don't have those kinds of things. And there's a lot of talk. Being an educator myself, I taught high school for almost a decade and ended up writing a business plan for a model school afterwards, out of the things I saw that was missing. And one of those was the assessment process. We do not look at the aptitude, attitude, and passion kids have toward something, and to be able to nurture that. Instead, we put them in a box, we teach them skills and give them information, and then expect them to repeat it to test them to make sure they get it. And yet, in the educational process and teacher training, there was this interesting fact that was brought up, and what it was 40% of the information learned is retained with passive listening. Now, by teaching it, 98% is retained. So what we've got things backwards. The kids need to be teaching, right? Give them the information, let them absorb it in whatever way they can, and then have the conversations where they're teaching each other about it.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be interesting to take place? And maybe so.
And they're engaged. How might that affect their engagement too? They're actually getting to show, their aptitude and their skills and their communication skills in terms of relating what they know. I think there's a lot of benefit to that in terms of the opportunity. And then so we go through education, and then we go to the workplace. Well, how are the workplaces set up? Well, they're set up like the production line thing. We're serving the factory, so this is how it's been. And so you go in, and it's assimilate and comply, assimilate and comply, assimilate and comply, and this is your role. It's your role. And so as the world evolves, and we find out people have multiple different talents, multiple passions, and we talk about employees are our best asset and caring about employees, yet it's sort of like what I see and what I live, right? What you see lived. The lived behavior isn't congruent with the words, right? And so there's incongruence there, right? And if so, having a dissenting opinion, or an opinion that didn't comply or conform, might have impacts for you, right? Might have impacts in terms of how you're viewed, and the opportunities that you may be afforded going forward based on what the expectations are. And everybody, where most of the world, at least in the US, the conditioning was get a job and comply. You got to navigate the culture, navigate the environment, navigate relationships. And it seemed to get further and further away from valuing the people for who they were, inviting and creating the conditions under which they could be seen and heard, and expanding impact and cultivating the expansion of impact. Because the experience was, walking through the door and putting on my what I call my work mask. And I wrote something on this too, the work mask, in terms of just survive during how do I survive the day, and then go back and live my life.
It's kind of like, and you're familiar with DISC assessments, right? In those DISC assessments, the assessment gives you your natural and your adaptive styles, and often those are two vastly different things, because one is who you are, the other is what you need to do to apply yourself in the given situation. One of the things that I guess a blessing that I've had, I was introduced to the partnering process in the construction world 20 some odd years ago, and this was brought about, in what you're saying, you go to work and you serve the mission and vision of the company, the job is the boss, and you don't really have a whole lot to say about it because it's a top-down kind of thing. Well, now with partnering, there had been, in the construction industry, it was an adversarial environment for a lot of years. And what they found was, and there were, lots of litigation that took place too. That's expensive. In the process of learning how to work with people, places, and things better, they developed this environment or this scenario and process that honored the each individual and the stakeholder team, what their skill set, their responsibility, their place in the job, but also brought them together to serve the job rather than the agendas of each of the subgroups within it. Because ultimately, it was the project, it was the completion, no injuries, all those kinds of things that are involved with that brought them all together to serve. I call it jobarchy, right? Where job's the boss and everybody wins. However, instead of the top down, this is kind of a bottom up, because you've got the specifications as to how the job needs to be built, right? And that's kind of how life is, right? When we peel the layers of the onion back. So this process actually allows that energy of the group to coalesce and focus on the goal, as opposed to the dissension and process, or the unhappiness that people generally feel in the workplace because they're not being paid attention to.
Yeah, I think of that as side-by-side leadership, right? So where everybody's contributing, bringing their brilliance. I call it interdependent leadership.
Right.
And so what's possible then when people are actually in flow with who they are and contributing that way. And the DISC is an assessment. I use the Strengths Finder often in terms of helping to identify strengths and the application of strengths to what the person's doing and what they want to do and how they show up in their life. And so how often are we taking even the time to get to know our people? I found that was a challenge that wasn't happening as a natural course. It was, all right, I lost a person, I've got to hire a new person, let me go get a new person, go through the process, bring them in, and the cog just keeps going, instead of, wait a minute, we have an opportunity here, let's reassess, we lost this person, this is the skill sets they brought, this is what we need going forward, which may or may not be what we needed in the past, and how do we make an intelligent choice of how do we build our roster, right? It's like a sports team, right? If I lose Michael Jordan off my sports team, there's an impact, right? As opposed to someone else whose skill set's different. And then the needs may have shifted too. And so that's a dynamic that it was just, this is how we've done it. Lose somebody, hire somebody, and then we keep moving forward, instead of, wait a minute, let's pause and reflect on what the needs are.
And do you find that may be due to a scheduling conflict, right? In other words, that there's deadlines and commitments on delivery of products or services or whatever, widgets, right? Whatever your deliverable is, it's based on a schedule and a timeline, and those timelines traditionally don't allow the HR component to enter in to make that work more effective, efficient, and even enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a timeline element to it. I mean, you get what you incent and you get what you prioritize, right? So in terms of priority, the habit that had formed that seemed to be embedded in, seems to be embedded in many work cultures is just get what we need. We have headcount, we have the money for it, let's go get it. And getting the body in there instead of asking what is the type of person we need. And how can we really do that if we don't really fully understand, other than we hired this person to be an accountant, this person to be an IT guy, this person to be a finance girl. And
we don't ask what their needs are.
Their needs are and what their aspirations are. How do they want to grow in their role? Where do they want to go?
Exactly.
And it's just about, we need someone to execute this thing. It's an execution focus, which business is execution, right? It's a huge part of it. And then the things that we focus on, engagement and those kind of things, are really outcomes, right? And we can't get to better outcomes like that until we start at the core in terms of connecting with our people and truly valuing.
Do you think that's the essence of what's being called agility in or agility in the new business development, um, post-pandemic, first of all, but even in the 21st century, the last century's methodologies don't work anymore. So that agility needs to be in place. And it would seem that what we're talking about, the exploration of the aspirations and needs of the employee are a better focus, because ultimately you get more production.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's common knowledge and common practice, right? So I think more people know that this is probably the way to go, and yet you
Larger
do it.
businesses, corporations, companies, they're like educational systems too. They're like dinosaurs, and they're really slow to move with change, even when that change needs to be sweeping and immediate in order to shift the direction. And sometimes that isn't, sometimes that's possible in smaller organizations, but when you get, I think, what was it, the Gore Associates determined that it was 150 people that constituted a community. And once that 150 was achieved, they built another building, right? So that was never a question. And so having those kinds of, or that kind of awareness, first of all, and looking at, okay, what are the dynamics of people working together? What are the optimal conditions, numbers, attitudes, support, education, and time you can spend with them. From an educational standpoint, I had 50 kids in the classroom for 50 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 1 minute per student that I have. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And
so how do we get around that? What do you see as being some of those options in taking what and the practical and pragmatic applications of that, and how it can or is working in places you've been able to help?
So, I mean, I see it. I'm connected to people like VaynerMedia with Claude Silver and Gary Vaynerchuk. Their culture is built on this kind of people first and prioritizing people first, and it's lived. The values are lived. It's not just spoken.
Right.
And so the first step to getting there is having an open mind about things being different than they've been, right? And being open to new ways of doing things and seeing differently. And then getting past the discomfort of it being unknown territory as a leader. Oh, I'm going there, it's uncomfortable. It may impact my ability to lead as effectively as I've been leading, the way I'm used to leading. And so that gets to relationship with vulnerability, relationship with control, relationship with fear, relationship with those kind of things. And
the relationship with control.
And the relationship with
releasing of it,
and whether it's truly valued, right? So if it's not valued, it'll never change, right? So in the organization, so if we had this in my organization, I had a VP when I was in IT that sort of led in this way, someone that you want to follow, that you want to be on their team, but he's not able to shape a 5,000 person organization unless there's alignment between his peers and then their bosses. And this is something that becomes a value that's lived within the organization. And so that's what, for me, we talk about whatever you want to talk about initiative wise, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everybody's talking about it, and yet we're still not much further along in the process. There's some change in terms of having more women in leadership roles and people of color in various roles, and yet it's not enough. And so for me, it's where does the priority lie? And HR is being it's being different than it's been viewed. It's being viewed as a partner and working alongside leadership. And doing that.
It's become a business unit too, within an organization.
In some organizations, and then it's even how they're viewed. IBM, And so there's, I think that the steps that I've seen there's a spectrum, right? Some people are kind of further along, but the steps are, first is the language, and then there's the attempted application, then there's the learning. It's the normal learning curve process, and then there's the embedded values that are lived, and then you can feel and see that, and then those tend to relate to the improvements you're looking to see in retention numbers, engagement numbers, results. However, the thinking about 90-day cycles for and stockholder value and the focus that it's been, and then the production kind of industrial age stuff. We've been conditioned for that for a long time. So unconditioning for people from that is different. Like, yeah, there's a deadline on this, but unless it's
now there's
brain surgery,
the 12-year or 12-week year model, right? The 90-day cycles, the quarterly cycles, where that, because of the nature of, and speed of which things work now, that truncation, I don't know if it has anything to do with Moore's law, right? But I think it probably does, because with the increase of use of not necessarily artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence, that it allows us to have a more rapid delivery cycle.
And I think some of what we're getting to is around that processes we have in place, which are great. They're necessary. The structure is necessary to run organizations and be successful. How often do we look at our policies and our processes and look at the needs now and align the two and say, wait a minute, we need to adjust and be more flexible with it. Decision making, critical thinking, the skills that are crucial now, they've always kind of been crucial. But if we have a process, maybe we become reliant on the process to execute the work and get things done. For me, it's the opportunity is in creating the conditions for people to thrive, and that starts with valuing people first. And there's data out now that's starting to prove that companies like VaynerMedia and others that are doing similar types, operating similar ways, that people want to stay longer. They bring discretionary effort. They are more collaborative than competitive. They're competitive in a good way with each other instead of against each other. And so I think that's where the sweet spot is the openness to seeing differently, and then committing and investing and changing.
So what I hear you saying is there's the openness to collaboration instead of competition. We're not seeing it as competition, even though there may be.
It's a we culture
even within organizations. WorldCom, and I'm sure you remember them. Maybe some of our viewers will. But their downfall came as a result of one of their division presidents, I guess it was, had a piece of software that would allow all the other divisions to talk to each other more effectively and communicate electronically. And he held it back for some reason. And as a result, communication failed. And when that happens, when there's not clear lines of communication and the ability to do so, everybody doesn't know what everybody else is doing. And so there's conflict and confusion and chaos, and it eventually just falls into entropy, right? So now we've got a little better understanding. And from what you're saying, that clarity has come through in the organizational development and the needs that are present in order to do so effectively.
Yeah, and we see, the lived values, I'll come back to that, right? It's demonstrated behaviors. If there's sharing going on, and open sharing and helping others with what you've been, sharing your knowledge, I would imagine that that's leading to better relationships, collaboration, openness, and there's systems in place, whether it's promotion systems and these kind of things that are important for people within organizations in terms of their career aspirations, decision making along those lines. They're in place with the mindset of we versus me in culture, and I think that
no ego without we go.
What's that?
No ego without we go,
we go. Yeah.
right?
And so that's the thing, right? It's you and I, the mindset, or the thing that I've seen most often in my career is, you and I it's a withholding of information, right? Why would he share it? Because of the culture there. It's like there's no benefit to him sharing that, or he created it in the first place, so he saw value, but the values didn't align with the values of the organization. So then that's the thing that I see too, is values alignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're talking about values alignment, does someone choose to come to company X because there's values alignment, or do they need a job, or there's different motivations why people choose to work in certain places.
Oh, absolutely, depending on the level of self-awareness. And so back to self-awareness again, and let's kind of hit the reverse button for a moment and go back to your experience at Georgetown.
Mm.
I have a suspicion, theory seems to be evidence, that personal move or that personal experience is a fractal of the larger, and that when it moves, the larger also. It's like the butterfly effect, right? How did you see that with yourself, and what the transformation that you had in comparison to then the larger group work? Does that make sense?
So yeah, so let me start, and if I'm not hitting your spot, then let me know in terms of that.
Okay. I don't know
With
that I have a
me,
spot to hit, but go
in
ahead.
terms of so yeah, we'll see where it goes.
I'm evasive, right? I
So
bounce around.
with me, what happened is I was able to let go of stuff, right? In terms of vulnerability, weren't caring about what other people think, and overly worrying and being anxious. Used anxiety back then. There's a lot of this energy of anxiety, and so showed up
The
at how I.
anxiety, if we pause for just a moment, the anxiety was because of what? The unknown, the change that was about to take
Oh,
place. It was uncomfortable, or kind
what
of all
led
the
to
stuff.
the actual need to shift my relationship with it. This
Okay.
is what will people think of me? Not good enough. Those kind of thought process. So going through the process now, it's what changed within me is just acceptance, right? We talked about judgment and acceptance. I had to accept myself, that I do have and bring value, and celebrate that, and then focus that in terms of how and who do I want to direct that energy towards, in terms of contributing to other people and team development opportunities, whether that's one-on-one coaching, or team coaching, or strategic coaching within organizations. It's really about awareness. It starts with awareness, right? So my awareness has shifted from, I saw through a different lens, I guess is the way I would put it, after I'd done that. So
Now, how do you spin that fractal out into a larger group setting to increase, not the, because it's a simultaneous thing. As the self-awareness increases, the group awareness tends to also.
yeah, and so from a self-awareness, well, self-awareness for me is what was getting in the way. I became clear on that. And so if we're going into a situation, whether it's another person or another group, and they're struggling with something, so what's getting in the way then?
Goldratt calls those bottlenecks.
Bottlenecks, yeah.
Right.
And so what's getting in the way? And so you start there and start getting curious about it. And typically they're along the lines of human stuff, communication, relationships, those kind of things, language, not being aware of energy, right? Your energy, someone else's energy that may be triggering you, those kind of things. So it's bringing conversational intelligence, it's bringing emotional intelligence, and some of these other tools to help people connect with their present.
Now, do you think that, I totally agree with you, and I believe this is, I also experience, this is what's happening, right? Do you see that the advances in the understanding from a quantum physics level about energy and about the seeming matter of being no matter, right? We're 99% space. Are those kinds of things kind of seeping through the instructional process with different language?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak on quantum physics, and I'm not in that.
Well,
That's
it's actually what you're talking about, being able to
okay,
sense people. Okay, that's energy. So there's a
right.
there's something going on that's
Mhm,
non-physical,
mhm.
right?
And
That you're
I equate it
sensing.
to awareness, and being able to be aware not just what you're hearing, but also through the body and all your faculties being um, awake to be able to receive and to engage with what's going on, and
Right.
taking in that information, and then being able to expand awareness that way, and then make decisions from that place. So if that's quantum physics, then
Well, and the
okay.
reason I'm bringing that in is because these kinds of things, the sensitivity, the empathy, those apparent,
Compassion,
what used to be called spiritual gifts, right,
yeah.
were seen as threatening to
Mm,
others, right? Because you couldn't hide, right?
yeah,
From that. And so those that could see and hear and feel and you know, that they're, I call them the clairals, all the different, you know, clair senses that are available that we don't necessarily incorporate or even consider, let alone know about.
mm,
Those become more accessible because now they have a scientific exploration or explanation, right? Where it used to be the woo-woo, you know, kind of new agey stuff, and people like, yeah, right. Where now there's actually science that backs it up, the
right.
neuroscience, the neurosensitivity in the body, and the centers that are available that show, and even, you know, and even the gamma uh, wave, or the gamma state in the MRIs, where they're testing athletes of either doing the thing or imagining it, and the brain responds the same. So those kind of applications seem to be, or I would hope anyway, are beginning to seep into the old industrial age mindset. And I'll make this distinction because the word mindset tends to be constrictive in my experience, right? It's more like a mind flow, because there's a movement that takes place as
Mm.
opposed to the boundaries of a mindset. So does that make sense? And how would
It
that?
makes sense. I think from a relatability, we use mindset for relatability. I think if we started getting into mind flow and stuff, the thing that's actually happening, we may not be able to connect with someone to try and get our point across. Unless you're at the level, unless you have someone that's at a level of understanding that can understand that piece of it. But
Or find
neuroscience,
simple ways to make the distinction.
yeah, yeah, we use language that makes the distinction.
Yeah.
In terms of so I lost my train of thought there.
Oh,
So with regard
catch the
to
caboose.
well, mindset, I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is help people move from where they are to where they're
Yeah.
to a place where they're better served. And
Could we
so
say it's to help people to find flow?
yeah, I call it inviting flow. Yeah.
Okay.
Inviting flow and going. So, acknowledge, release, invite. It's sort of like the practice there. And so if we're talking about workplaces and how do we move forward from where we are? How do I work with people to help the group bring what I experienced personally to the group? I think it's everybody wants data, right? And so it's always been data, 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 data. Now the data is more human related data. We've got the capacity to share some neuroscience and other related data to help prove, so that someone say, okay, I'll invest in doing this, or I won't invest in doing this. And so that element, I think, has been there. It's just the type of data now, I think, available to us and becoming more trusted leads to more opportunity.
Do you think that maybe Roddenberry had the idea in mind of showing that transference with data and the human interaction, and how that character was used in the series?
I'm not sure if your reference is lost on me, so I'm not sure I can
Data
respond to that.
in the Star Trek series, the
Yeah,
android that was wanting to be human and
I'm
had
not a Star
so
Trek
many.
guy, unfortunately, so the
Okay,
reference is a bit
all
lost on
right.
me. Sorry.
Well, that's just, that's one thing. I grew up with Star Trek and looking at the things that were included in that reflect our human condition and the challenges that we face, and oftentimes how we can overcome them too, in that openness and finding flow. But the aspect of data being that not particularly AI, but the augmented intelligence that was able to bridge the gap between the numbers and humanity,
Mm.
right? And so that's kind of what we're doing now. It seems. Do you see that process happening where we're learning how to humanize the data and apply it so that we can have a better living environment as a result?
I do. I think more in my space is humanizing the conversations and getting connected to having conversations about how people feel at work, right? You can't, cry at work. You can't express emotions at work, that kind of thing. I think we're having the
You
conversations that
can, it's just
matter.
if you do, it's going to be.
There's consequences. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those kind of things is getting just back to the basics of listening, asking people about themselves, how they feel, what are they seeing, inviting people in to share their thoughts. I think it's some of the basic stuff. We can start there. And then, yes, data that supports, investing in large initiatives that support moving. Yes, we can definitely do that. And there's more of that happening, and we're humanizing some of the data, as you were mentioning. For me, I think it's just starts with connection. If we just get back to the basics of connecting with another one, listening, looking people in the eye, truly listening, actively listening, and giving people, inviting them to share their voice, and creating the conditions under which people feel they matter, then I think all the other stuff starts to take care of itself.
I would agree, and active listening being a part of it for our listeners or our watchers, viewers. Active listening, if you're not familiar with that, means that you are listening well enough to reframe, in your words, what you just thought you heard the person say in order to achieve congruence in the exchange of the message, right? Now, you mentioned that the connectivity that's been missing in this last couple of years. Do you see, we went from a place where the narrative was basically telling us to be afraid of each other, right? And to avoid each other at all costs. Ask up, sequester, all that kind of stuff. Do you see that now having the reverse effect, where we've gotten so far on one end of the spectrum that now people are coming back and they're wanting to connect it in deeper, more sustainable and significant ways?
So I think my experience for the pandemic the last 2 years is finding new ways to connect, right? So we had Zoom became a huge way to connect with people during the pandemic because we weren't able to meet in person. I think the need to connect's always been there. I think the mechanism of how we do it has changed. And I think now, as we navigate through the pandemic as it ebbs and flows in terms of its impact, we find ways to connect and be with people that meet our needs. Some people need to be face to face. Some people don't need that as much, and some people don't like spending back-to-back meetings on Zoom. I don't think anybody does, because it's a lot of focused energy there, and
Isn't that same kind of focused energy present in a normal work day when you've got meeting after meeting after meeting in person too?
It can be, and I think the difference being the disconnect. There's an element of disconnect perhaps with technology than there is in the present era, where you have to fully be on. You have to have your video on. And you can kind of be disconnected mentally.
You can do that in
You
face-to-face
can do that in
meetings
meetings
too.
as well. And so I guess
Just look at the eyes around the room. Not everybody's there.
right, and that's the case with most people. I guess from the standpoint of connection, in terms of whether it's what it's like now versus then, I can speak from my experience, but I can imagine there's various different experiences, and depending upon where you are in the world and your preferences. For me, what I see happening is people want we're on the spectrum, right? So as soon as people, after the pandemic came out, as soon as people could get out and be with people, they did that, right? And the United States, in some cases, to the detriment of the greater whole, right? Because people were choosing what they wanted to do without wearing masks and getting into restaurants and other places and crowds, because that was their choice. They felt like maybe they were constrained. And
based on all the information I've read from the science standpoint and even the medical standpoint, the masks really weren't all that effective, and they would actually do more damage to your oxygen content.
Well, masks or even social distancing, right? It doesn't have to be masks, social distancing, but just the safety.
I like to make distinctions.
Sure. So, but whatever safety measures would make it less likely to transmit is really the point. The point about masks is, I'm sure, a topic that's going to get people from both sides of the equation there.
Well, and that brings in the, if you're healthy and you have a healthy immune system, then you're probably going to be fine. And the fact that we have succumbed to the fast foods, the box foods, the stuff with little nutrition value, and most of the people in the United States are overweight. So that's going to have an effect on how things spread too. And we didn't really take that into consideration.
Yeah.
My opinion.
Yeah, well, the food thing is an interesting thing, right? We get conditioned to like the taste of food, right? But not necessarily relate to the nutritional value and what the harm it may be doing from a young age. And then again,
MSG was created to do just that. It was a taste enhancer to get you to want more. It was used in rats to fatten them up in the laboratory, and then they started putting it in our food. I mean, come on.
Yep.
Anyway,
and so it's again learned behaviors, right?
Right.
Unlearning. Back to what you asked me about unlearning, and that's the thing too. Is the thing that with unlearning is, as adults, when we have we mature our cognitive capacity around 25 or 26. I'm told from science perspective is when we get fully mature brain, and most people. That the opportunity to self-reflect and question some of the values and beliefs, and do so without judgment, and then just connect with what do you believe? Ask yourself, what do you believe? What is it that you want to stand for? If it's different than what your family or the people close to you believe, that can be difficult. When I'm working with people from different cultures, there's, and especially people that have come to the US and they want to progress in their career, right? There's the values that are in the culture from where they may be coming from may not lend themselves to their being successful in getting into leadership roles here. And so there's an opportunity there to not change the values or disconnect from the values that you have.
American companies had the same experience trying to go overseas and take our culture over there, not studying the cultures that they were going into.
Exactly.
And 80% of them failed as a result. And then, they wonder why. Well, the same thing's happening to others coming here now, where, they don't, I'm sure they take into some consideration the culture they're going into. And yet, as a whole, our culture here is the youngest on the planet. We've got 200 years of amalgamation and assimilation, and we're still haven't learned how to get along together to the point where we're that cohesive as a national community.
And
do you see that changing?
Until we are naturally and intentionally more curious, no, because I think there's still more fear than there is curiosity. Until that dynamic changes, I am skeptical about any meaningful change.
Well, let's look at that for just a moment, because in order to do that, I know you've got some wisdom you can share. What kind of advice could you give for those who are facing that kind of movement in their own lives,
So
as to how they're dealing with the diversity and being able to not necessarily assimilate, but to embrace it and move into it more effectively?
So assimilate becomes the word. I've searched for a different word. I haven't been able to find one that I prefer at this point. But coming, say, into the corporate world, right? Understanding first what is important to you. I think you start with where do I want to go, right? And what matters to you? Because what I find in some cultures is the energy tends to be outward and upward in terms of respect for elders and others. A lot of people haven't really taken the time to go inside and say, you know, this is what really matters to me. I really want to do this. My family may want me to go become a doctor or whatever profession of prestige, and I'm invested a lot in doing this, but you know what? I'd rather do something else. I'd rather become an artist or do something else that may cause some harm. So I think first is knowledge of self,
and giving you permission to do so,
and giving yourself permission to do so. Yeah. And then it's okay. When I make my choice of seeking employment, making sure that there's an alignment or an opportunity there that aligns with what you're looking to do, and then creating it, right? And so how do I create what I want? How do I build relationships? Because that's the other thing too, in terms of people that may come from cultures where it's not valued or not thought highly of to brag about yourself or to kind of put yourself out there in that way. Help them see that behavior of speaking up for yourself as not being braggadocious, but as sharing your accomplishments and having that tied to why you want to go and pursue this new role or this promotion or whatever. So it's getting them to think in terms of framing things differently, to align their needs to the goals. They may have to change their framing of their language and their approach to their work. And I think it's the same with, you know, if people from America are going to other countries, we've got to do some research first and understand, you know, what are the customs, what are the things they should do, what are the things they shouldn't do, and so in terms of for people that are coming here and how do you, for lack of a better word, assimilate, I think it starts with your understanding of self. And so and that might be something that a journey people go on for the first time. So that might be something to take into consideration. And if it is, you know, you seek out someone that might be able to help you, whether it's a coach or someone else to help you be a learning and a listening partner to help you determine how you might approach it from a language perspective, from a strategy perspective, in a way that serves you.
And I would think the critical factor and necessity there is to have another, as opposed to a book or a DVD or
actual person,
like that. You have to have that capacity for conversation. Otherwise, it's just a feed in. There's no feedback loop.
Very important point. Thanks for adding that.
Books are interesting. That's what grows our relationships, right?
That's right. And so books are interesting. We grow our knowledge, but yeah, you can't get that feedback from someone else. And I might offer too, and if you're moving to a new country, you may not have family here, so it might have to be someone that's not in your inner circle, but someone that is a little bit outside your circle that can truly play the support person without having any preconceived notions based on their experience with you. That might offer some value. And then the other thing I would suggest is multiple people, right? Some that do know you, some that don't. Men, women, depends sort of what you're looking to do. And it's just like with mentors, I advocate for multiple mentors based on what you're looking to do, stage of life, functional role, those kind of things can help give you different perspective and insights from which you can make your own decision, right? Because your mentors, they're just giving you, sharing their knowledge, but you make your own decision from that perspective. And so the more
Absolutely.
information you get from diverse perspectives, the better off you'll be, right?
That's what's wonderful for me is I have so many mentors in the conversations that I have through this program. And wow, the learning is just spectacular. And I truly appreciate the time that you've spent with me today and given of your insight, wisdom in the process that you've been through that can ultimately be beneficial for others.
I hope so. And I thank you for inviting me on to be with you today. Enjoyed the conversation and always enjoy the explorations. I always learn something from these conversations I can take away and bring back. So
Yeah. Hence
hopefully
the apocalyptic chat.
that's right, the apocalyptic chat. So yeah, hopefully there's stuff that people can take away and bring to their own lives, something of
Excellent.
value.
Great. Well, thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, Zen. Appreciate it.
Namaste and in la
Namaste.
catch. Thank you so much for being with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I will see you next time.